Welcome to Beyond the Surface. We highlight unique voices in architecture and design. We share their stories to uncover who they are beyond the surface. Hi, I'm your host, Alex Sanchez, representing our Beyond the Surface team. Today's episode is called Design Legacy with our guest, Gabriel Ignacio Dziekiewicz. Gabriel is the president and principal in charge of design at DesignBridge, an award-winning Chicago-based architecture firm with a nearly 40-year history. Gabriel is a licensed architect in Illinois, Michigan, and Florida, and they lead APBD&C. Since joining DesignBridge in early 2007, he has led the design direction and collaborated on numerous architectural and interior design projects, including mixed-use and residential developments, affordable housing, academic buildings, hotel and hospitality design, high-end residential interiors, and restaurant and entertainment concepts. In 2015, Gabriel was appointed by Mayor Rahm Emanuel to serve as the commissioner on the Commissions on Chicago Landmarks, where he also sits on the Commission's Permit Review Committee. His expertise and interest in historic preservation has made him a key member of the Landmark Commission. He is also a board member of HACIA, the Hispanic American Construction Industry Association. Gabriel received his Bachelor of Arts in Architecture from Miami University in Ohio and completed his Master's of Architecture at the University of Illinois in Chicago. Thank you for being here. We're excited to have this conversation with you. I was very excited when hearing about who you were and doing all the research that brought us to this conversation. So yeah, I'm very excited to have this conversation. How are you feeling today?
I feel great. Thank you so much for having me. And I've listened to the show, and I've got to listen to a lot of people that I very much respect in the industry. And you guys are doing a wonderful job with the podcast. So congrats on that.
Thank you. I am really glad that you're familiar with the show. I think Caleb brought it to me one time when he was like, he follows our podcast, and he was excited. So it's really nice to be able to talk to you today. Well, let's get started in the conversation. So can you tell me a little bit about your background and how you grew up?
Absolutely. So I grew up in Chicago, and I'm a proud Chicagoan. I grew up in Lakeview, in the Lakeview neighborhood, which actually changed quite a bit in my lifetime. My mom still has a home there. I come from pretty diverse backgrounds. My mother is Puerto Rican, born and raised in Chicago. Her parents came here from Puerto Rico and started their family here. And they actually rooted in Lincoln Park, interestingly enough, in a place that she talks about that it was wonderful growing up there. What happened was with her dad ended up kind of getting nervous about gang activity in the neighborhood. So her whole family, her siblings, she was 15, and then they uprooted to Logan Square. And so for her, she had to uproot and make all her new friends in Logan. And I think it's just interesting to think about Chicago that way and those neighborhoods, especially Lincoln Park. They were a working class family. Her mom was a homemaker. Her father worked in different jobs. He worked at the Palmer House in the kitchen, and then he also ended up working in a factory. So that, very humble beginnings. My dad, he was an immigrant story. He was born and raised in Buenos Aires, Argentina, with European roots. Now, that's how I have the last name that I have. So his parents were Italian and Polish, and they met in Italy. During the war, toward the end of the war, my grandfather was stationed in Italy, and he met my grandmother. She was a teacher. And interestingly enough, and I kind of wish I could probe on these kind of questions, but they actually didn't speak the same language, and they fell in love somehow, and they learned a little bit of each other's languages throughout their lives. And so somehow they communicated. He only spoke Polish, he spoke only Italian. And during that time, he married my grandmother. He needed to become an Italian because you could only have one citizenship in that time. So he was very stubborn and very proud of being Polish, and he refused to become Italian. And he couldn't go back to Poland with her because Poland was acquired by Russia at the time. It was like a Russian territory. So what happened is they actually both completely lost their citizenships. They were without state, and they had to leave Italy. And they wanted to come to the United States, but there was no quota for Europeans there. So Argentina had a quota open. And so that's how my grandmother's idea was, that's closer to the U.S. Eventually they wanted to come to the U.S. We'll go to Argentina, and then we'll eventually, hopefully, get to the United States. So that's how they moved to Argentina. My father was born in Argentina and really had a deep connection to Argentina. He was Argentinian. His friends there were there. He went to the schools there. That was his language. And he lived there until he was 13 years old. And he lived actually right by Monumental Stadium, which was where the River Plate Stadium. And so there's just a lot of things that he loved about where he lived. They had to uproot and move to the United States. Interestingly enough, for coming to the United States, there was a quota open, not for Polish people, not for Italian people, but for Argentinians. So my grandfather took this opportunity to finally get a citizenship, and he became an Argentinian so that they could come to the United States. So they came to the United States when my dad was 13, which was obviously 13 is a really difficult time to uproot completely, leave all your friends, everything, and they moved to Detroit. Being an immigrant coming to the United States, people were not very welcoming about the language. So the language was something that people were hard on him about, made fun of him a lot. And I think as a kid, that was really difficult. So his goal in life, and he made it his mission, was to speak English better than Americans. He really did. He didn't have an accent in his later life. So he ends up going to the University of Detroit for architecture school. He was a smart guy. He got into U of M with a full ride and chose University of Detroit because at the time it was a very progressive program that they had. They had a young dean, and it was an exciting time. So he goes to architecture school there. It's a 6-year program. He only does 4 years. Kind of takes a little detour to investigate creating his own curriculum to do graphics. So he becomes very involved in graphics in the school and kind of redoes their whole, their yearbook and identity a little bit. But then he realizes, so he kind of wastes a couple years there. He gets this 4-year degree, and then he realized, wait, what am I going to do for a living? I think I do want to be an architect. So he has his 4-year degree. He needs to get 2 more years, and that led him to Virginia Tech, where he does his master's, and then eventually comes to Chicago, and he ended up working at Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. At Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, he worked for Walter Netsch, and that's where he met my mom. And my mom tells a story about getting the job there. She was an assistant for 2 of the principals, and she saw this man. He was speaking Spanish in this impeccable way. He was a light-skinned man, and she was like, I'm gonna marry that man. She said it took him 2 weeks to ask her out. She would make trips to the coffee machine. She did not drink coffee, but he did. And her cubicle would be filled with 6 cups of undrank coffee. And finally, he followed her to the coffee machine and asked her to lunch. And that's how my parents met. And so they really bonded over the love of the language. The language is what brought them together.
I love this love story. It's very beautiful. So your parents pretty much met at an architecture firm over the love of language. That's a really interesting path to have. So did you always grow up with architecture, in your house, around?
Yes, actually, architecture, my father was very devoted to beginning his company, and he worked all the time. And as kids, first of all, my father was always coming home late. He was working on the weekends. He used to joke that I love Fridays because that means there's 2 more working days till Monday. And it's very, very devoted. And as kids, we spent, my mom was involved in the business. She was doing the payroll, and we were there too. We were there all the time. So it was all around me. But interestingly enough, it was so much that my dad worked so hard, and in contrast to my friends whose parents weren't in that working as much, it made me really not want to be an architect at all. I wanted to be something completely different, and I told my dad that one day, and my mom tells me that he was heartbroken, although he never told me that. But I remember saying first of all, it's an old man's profession, and it just I don't want to work that much,
So in that case, what drew your father to architecture, and what ended up drawing you to it as well?
Well, I think what drew my father to architecture, I think in his family, they were always interested in architecture. Actually, my grandfather, he was studying at the University of Rome for architecture before he had to leave Italy. So he was interested in architecture all the way back then. He never became an architect because they had to leave, and a lot of things, life happened. And I don't know I'm assuming that had a big influence on my father. Actually, his sister became an architect too. So there was definitely something in that family. For me, I guess through osmosis, architecture was around me, but I didn't want to do it, and it wasn't till the last minute for me that I realized that architecture could be something that I want to do, and that, as we all go through our identity, finding ourselves in high school, I could have gone a lot of different ways. Unfortunately, there was a program in our school. It was a 2D, 3D drafting course, and I wanted to give a shout out to Mr. Cleland, who ran that course, and he helped me see and get some confidence in drawing and just different projects that we're doing, model making, back in the day, stippling, and just kind of getting lost in creating. And then I was like, I could do this this is pretty interesting. I think I will try architecture. And it was just a one-day thing. And I came home and I was like, I'm going to do architecture. It was very fast. It was really, and then, because what else was I going to do in college? I was like, I do want to go to college. I'm not going to be a politician. Like, I'll try to create and do drawings and build.
You mainly grew up in Chicago, and I know you went to Miami University for architecture. So, what made you go to Ohio?
That's a good question. In picking a school for undergrad, I applied to several schools. One of my best friends was applying to this school called Miami, Ohio, and I had never heard of it actually. And so that was the reason why I applied, because he was going there. I ended up getting into the school, and so we went to visit, and it was an incredible place, incredible campus. It felt like this Ivy League picturesque campus. There's all these red buildings, these amazing quads. And the design program was very design focused, not technical. And the building was addition to an older building. It was like they had these channel glass floors. It had a feeling that I couldn't say no to. I was very interested in that. And going to Ohio was really good for me, because I had never been out of Chicago. And I think taking some time and discovering myself in this place, and also the people were people that I never would have experienced before. And that was interesting for me. And I needed that. People that were super focused. And I know that happens in all the architecture schools, but there was something that I needed to see, being in a dormitory and then be like, well, where is everybody? Oh, they're all studying for this history exam. Mm-hmm. And it was really good for me to be away, and it helped me mature a lot. I think back very fondly of Miami, Ohio. It was a great school.
After undergrad, did you come back to Chicago?
Yes. So after undergrad, I had a bachelor's, and I needed to get a master's, and I was going to continue my education. When you're in the middle of undergrad, you're working on all these things, and then to apply for grad school, it just felt like I didn't have enough time to build my portfolio. What I wanted to do was take some time to work on my portfolio so that I could apply for schools and get into the schools I wanted to get into. So I made the decision to take a year off to come back to Chicago and to work before going to grad school. And I took that time to apply to schools and gain some experience. My father was actually very not so keen on that idea. He was worried that I would not continue to school, because you get to the workforce and you just keep going. It's hard to stop. But for me, it was like super clear. I had it mapped out. I had the timeline, and that was what I was going to do. And I did. And I ended up coming back to Chicago. I ended up getting a job at a place called DeStefano & Partners, which was a spinoff of some Skidmore Partners. And I worked there for that year. I worked on the retail studio. It was definitely not glamorous work. We were working on prototypical CVS pharmacies across the city. It was eye-opening, very fast-paced. And it led to some things, though. I stayed there for a little bit, and then they ended up getting, so this is around like 2001 to 2, 9/11 terrorist attack happened. There was some fear of building at that time, but they ended up getting the only kind of tower commission at that time. So that came into the office, and what happened is the entire office got to work on that project. So was working on the retail, but then got the opportunity to work on several parts of that tower, which was not only in that year, but then I also got to intern a couple times, 2 summers, working on, it's called One South Dearborn. And so I built like models of the roof, and like I ended up going to LA, which I thought was gonna be, because they merged with an LA firm to build this. And I go to LA, which was like this huge honor. I was so excited. And it was just 12 hours of work. There was no time there was no time for exploration. It was like, you're expected to just be there, slaving away. And so it was a good experience.
It's like the stories of the people that say, I've been to LA, but they were just doing a layover. That's probably how it felt.
It was.
But you had a lot of experience, especially before going back to school, and I feel like that's very valuable because it narrowed down what your expectations was going to be after school. So you knew most likely like what your career was going to look like versus what school makes your career want to look like. But I also feel like those type of experiences really make you question what you really want to do in architecture, what you're going to use architecture for. And if not in that moment, it would in the future, especially when you graduated graduate school, right? So could you talk a little bit about going to graduate school and your early career after that?
Absolutely. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of growth that, between all these different times and graduate school. So I ended up applying to graduate school. I got into a few different schools. Cost became a factor. I got into IIT, and I think very highly of IIT. We have most of our office actually is from IIT. But I ended up choosing UIC, and at the time it actually would have been about the same price for me. I got like a half scholarship, 50% scholarship for IIT, and then UIC was very affordable at the time. I chose to go to the design-oriented school. and I tried to represent it very well. But I went to UIC. It was a 2-year program. It was really great. I lived at home at the time. So I was living at home with my parents. And UIC, so it was a 2-year program, so 4 semesters with 1 semester that was study abroad in Barcelona. It was a great program. There was some wonderful professors there that, had a profound impact on me. I got to work under, study under and be inspired by the great Dan Wheeler, who inspires many architects. I think that there are hundreds or more that he inspired. So, he helped me a lot. He helped me see a different type of practice because I was really only seeing how my father's practice was. And so to kind of look and to see how his practice was really influential for me, as well as I had another professor who I just remember one comment that he made to me, which was, I was very interested in like Calatrava type of work, repetition, skeletal things, and so complicated. And so one professor was like, I'm going to challenge you, try to do something extremely simple, just do a box, try it. So I did that, which was, with the professors around me was good. I had Dan Wheeler, who was very good at that. So it was a really good experience. And Barcelona was a housing studio, so there was a housing influence happening there as well. We got to spend a whole semester there, which was wonderful. So it was a great experience. Once I finished there, I ended up working at Solomon Cordwell Benz, where again, my father had this office. I was interested in that, but I was definitely adamant that I was not going to go there until I had earned some really good experience. I wanted to be licensed, which didn't happen, but I wanted to come there with some good stripes. And so SCB did give me a great experience. I got to work on my digital skills, got to see how a corporate office was run, very organized. And I got to, eventually when I decided to make the jump, which I was going to talk about that a little bit, it was a 2-year journey, 2006 and 2007. And my father was extremely busy at the time. Not a lot of talent because this is the condominium boom before. So everybody was busy. Everybody was working. I was living at home. My dad was actually driving me to work. I was very close to my family. I could see how stressed he was. I had a personal relationship that fell apart, and I was just like, I have to make a change. And it was a little bit before I wanted to, but he needed help. He couldn't find anyone, and I said, okay. So in 2007, I joined DesignBridge.
So you joined DesignBridge in 2007. Can we go back in time and talk a little bit about the founding of DesignBridge and when your father decided to start a firm?
Absolutely. So my mother and my father met at Skidmore, and they found a relationship, and partly due to that, they could not work at Skidmore anymore. They had to quit Skidmore. So my parents left the firm, and my father ended up starting a company with one of his colleagues at Skidmore. They had that company for maybe 2 to 3 years. At a certain point, the partnership was not working out. My father felt he was doing too much of the work. And so he actually ended up in the middle of the night taking all his things and getting out of there. And so in that moment, he was going to build something else. And that's how DesignBridge was founded. And the name of DesignBridge and what it was, and it still is because it's the foundation of us, is bridging the design disciplines. So he founded it with the idea that you're going to have architecture, interior design, and graphic design all in one place. And that's the origin story of DesignBridge. And in terms of that history, from my perspective and from what I saw, it was like every decade was a little bit different. There was a focus on graphics for a long time where they were doing catalogs and advertising. There was definitely like interiors, heavy things that were happening, corporate interiors, smaller exhibits. And then there was also a really interesting stint in the 90s where they started to do furniture. So they were doing like case goods and actually doing really sculptural furniture that my father did. And I have a couple of pieces in my house, and I think they have a lot of merit. I'd love to see how to do something with them one day because they're pretty cool pieces. And a lot of them, they were pretty serious about them. Some of the designs, the original drawings are wrapped in and sealed in black plastic. So they had this furniture that they were doing. They were photographing. They were doing the advertising for it, and that was a big thing. They won some different Neocon awards and things like that in the 90s. And then in about 98, and there may have been more buildings, but from my perspective, being around the office and when I started to pay more attention, because 98, that's like when I'm finishing high school. So I'm going to college for architecture. I'm starting to see and pay more attention to what my dad's been doing. And they get a commission for a larger condominium development. There's a 64-unit project that is called Lakeview Point, and it's at the border of Evanston and Chicago, where Sheridan meets the lake. And it was the project for the office, and kind of, I think, what got us to what the firm was doing in kind of becoming experts in housing and multi-unit housing. And of course, there was other projects. They were doing single families and they were doing all these, but the forecasting what we're doing today, that is sort of the foundation of it. And then throughout the 2000s, they were doing a lot of condominiums. I was, doing my own track, finishing school, getting experience at other offices. And then at the height of everything, 2007, I made the jump to join DesignBridge and join my dad. There were real projects that I was able to design myself, which, that was also part of the interest, is that working for corporate, there's all these layers. And so here I had the layer of my dad, but, he was giving me freedom to take my own project. And that was enticing. And that's how the firm was, because small firms are like that, right? It's like you have a lot more responsibility because you don't have all those layers. So 2007, and then that's a very short time. 2008 happens, and everything fell apart. So I think the office when I joined maybe was 8 to 10 people, and then we were quickly down to 4 people, including my father. Yeah, so we had 4 people, and this was also a very challenging time for me in architecture because there was literally nothing happening in Chicago. There was no work, and it was a very tough time for many people, for architects for sure. But around 2009, 2010, I'm like, I don't know if I want to do architecture. This is too hard. And I stuck with it. I did get my realtor license. I was trying to find my way out. But I stuck with it. And then some things started happening with education. There ended up being some charter school work that was happening in Chicago. And we were getting involved in some renovations, which led to the opportunity to compete for a couple competitions for some new schools. And this sort of brought some excitement, I think helped lead to the kind of work that we're doing today, because I think it was recently, Norman Foster talked about, going after a competition. If you put the right mentality into it, whether you win or lose, you learn something. And that's very true. We actually didn't win either one, but we put some really compelling proposals together. And I think we shook things up, with them. I think it was very difficult for them not to choose us. So we lost that. That was hard. And I had a very good friend of mine who helped work on those competitions, Antonio Torres from UIC. Shout out to him. He and I worked really hard, and we bonded very well on these. And unfortunately, we didn't get them. But as things happened, and there was literally still nothing happening, but some housing started happening. There were some renovations, and then we got invited to another competition for a housing development, new construction, where all those skills and all those lessons learned from those school projects we were able to put into this, and we won the competition in 2012. And that was affordable housing, new construction, kind of innovative because it was a single loaded corridor building, things that I don't know if I would be able to replicate now because it was just, the timing was right. And it was LEED for Homes Platinum, won several accolades, and it's kind of like the foundation of, I think, the last almost 15 years of the work that we've been doing, which has been in community development and affordable housing, mixed-use development.
What I find interesting is the way that you're storytelling about the firm. You knew about it before you joined, so you were able to always have an ear to what was kind of going on. And when you joined the firm, you saw it developing more over time. It's nearly 40 years, so it's a firm with a lot of history. But I feel like it's just really cool to see something grow in real time, especially growing up with the firm. Can you also talk about when you first joined the firm, did you have a design mission or what you wanted to do in design? If not, then how did you find yourself shape the firm into what it is now?
I definitely did see an opportunity to help guide the firm in a way, and I was given that opportunity because I ended up helping to create and refine renderings. So I was able to sort of look at some of the designs, and I'd have the final kind of eye in a way, only because I knew the software that at the time when I joined, everyone was still drawing everything by hand, even our renderings, and they were all by hand. So I started to bring the digital part to it, which helped me a little bit of my spin on things sometimes, and I would have to kind of show it in ways that I wouldn't make anyone upset. Hey, look, if we just do this, turn on a layer, turn off a layer, to show what it could be. So because it was a small firm, and because they didn't have sort of any digital, I was the person doing that. So that allowed me to kind of influence the design direction a little bit. I also saw that design, because in the 2000, that kind of mass production of condominiums, there was a lot of bad things that were being built. Probably there are buildings that we're not proud of to own at this time, to talk about, the truth. And I think that the recession and the opportunity to, there was some exciting things happening in architecture because nothing was happening and people were pushing the limits. And I think that helped us be a little more design forward. And after we won that first competition, I think we saw that could be a recipe for success, that we should be pushing the limits a little bit more when we can.
No, I like that response. And as the firm started to develop, you also started to grow in the firm as well. Can you talk about the transition into becoming president at DesignBridge?
Sure. So I would say the transition to becoming president of DesignBridge was not something that was planned or ever talked about. As a small office, I had influence, and I was beginning to have a role in a say in design ideas. But the way that I became president was very unexpected. We received news that my father became very sick in 2013, late 2013. We received news that my father had colon cancer in 2013, and that it was something that, as a family, as anyone getting that kind of news, you just think, okay, well, we got this news, it's horrible, but we're going to defy the odds. We're going to do whatever we can to, defy the odds, because they basically told us that, we had 12 months. So as a family, my sister was very focused on trying to help my dad, trying to find every sort of option that was available to him in terms of different therapies that were available, diets, incredible amount of work to try to help figure out how to, avoid what the doctors were telling us was going to happen. And then myself focusing just to keep the ship afloat and make sure that, really, we didn't, this is not something you advertise, because you think like, why, we're going to try to beat this, right? So my father was sick, trying to figure things out. He was still the face of the company, and I was just increasingly being involved in the work, and I had to be out there. He was traveling too. I mean, they traveled to try to find whatever they could. So unfortunately, and my father never talked about like succession, never talked about like, you're going to run the company ever, the entire time. And so it wasn't until probably like the last couple of weeks when my father was alive, like looking at him, it wasn't looking good. But still, we never talked about it, and we never had a plan. So, he ended up passing on March 1st, 2015, and so it's a little over 10 years. This was the 10th year. And that day, it was a Sunday, and we all stayed at the house, and our whole family was there, so we must have known, even though we weren't talking about it. We were all slept over that night. And we just reacted. So that day, even though it wasn't formalized, I knew what to do, and I just did it. I had to call a couple of our clients and tell them what happened. And some people really were shocked. They didn't really know, even though my dad was doing this. Like he was going to meetings when he could, and it was crazy. So, obviously had a lot of support. People trusted me because that was the thing. I had to call people, tell them, look, it's going to be all right. Like me, Dale, and Tony, we've been running the show. Like I know my father is, the face, but we're doing the work. It's going to be okay. And people trusted us for the most part. I think the hardest was probably like single family clients who was the relationship with my father, and the relationship with my father with some of the other things too. But I was out there and people knew what I was doing, so it helped. But again, people had to take a leap of faith, and clients had to take a leap of faith, and so that's sort of how that transition happened. It was very sudden. It was not planned, and we just try to carry my father's legacy forward. We try to build on the things that he instilled in us, even by not saying, just integrity, hard work. And I personally feel like extremely connected to him because I just feel like he is inside of me in everything that I do.
Mm-hmm. I think one thing that is nice is it does feel like he's living on in you, especially since you're doing the work and you're furthering the business, making it the best that you can do, but also what he probably would have wanted as well.
It's an honor to be able to do that. Like I get to feel him that way.
Mm-hmm. In everything you do, yeah. Yeah, thank you for sharing your story. I know that's not an easy story to tell, and you probably thought a lot of how to answer that question. So yeah, I appreciate you talking about it on the
I appreciate the
podcast.
question. It's interesting. A lot of times when I talk about the story of DesignBridge, I skip over that part. So it's one of the few times I've actually come back to talk about what actually happened. So thank you.
And thank you too. After you transitioned into becoming president, how did the firm start to change after that?
Well, the firm changed considerably. It took some time, but we built. Casa Querétaro was a very important project for us, which is the one that we won in 2012, and we finished it in 2016. So now we're talking about the last 10 years, and that project has helped us to get our name out there more in terms of design and our work in housing. We've continued to build on that, and we've had some other opportunities, and it's definitely just try to push where we can, but understanding that we are working within budgets. So there's that constant balance of how do you push design, but balance the budget without, you can't be irresponsible with the dollars, because a lot of the dollars are public dollars, and so you have to kind of balance that. But there are opportunities, and that is the balancing act that makes this profession pretty interesting, or this work pretty interesting.
One thing that I did find very interesting is your involvement with Hacia, mainly because I've seen a lot of architects be more involved in more the architecture organizations rather than a construction organization. So can you tell me why Hacia is a organization that stands out to you, especially approaching it from the construction side?
Yes, of course. So that's a good question, and it goes very far back as well. So as a company, my dad, before I was even in DesignBridge in 2002, joined Hacia as a member, and he became very involved in the organization, served on the board himself, and then he became board president for a couple of years later. I think it was 2009 and 10, which was interesting for me because I was there at DesignBridge while he was devoting a lot of time as board president to Hacia. So he really volunteered a lot of his efforts there. And I was involved too. He would bring me to events and things like that. And actually, during that time, if you remember, the 2008, 2009, there was no work. So work that I actually was doing was spending time on marketing for Hacia. I actually developed their newsletter. I did different flyers for different events and things like that. So kind of have a long history with the organization from that perspective. And the organization is a wonderful organization. It's advocating for opportunities for underrepresented communities, right? And it's pretty inclusive, even though it's Hispanic American Construction Industry Association, it's really all inclusive. So I was not a board member, but that organization, the relationships that were in that organization have helped our firm. And it's a relationship networking organization. I got involved. My father passed away, and folks knew me, and they said, hey, I was all by myself at the office, and I remember this day, a couple of board members, friends, they came to our office and they said, hey, we want you to join us. And so people help you, right? And people came to help me that day, and so they got me involved, and that helped me, have something to other things to focus on. Made some great relationships there. Again, it's a great organization. There's many different facets to it. There's a scholarship organization that I don't know if you guys have heard about it here at IIT, but there's actually a scholarship open now for IIT.
It's pretty cool how an organization can start as a network or as a simple organization and end up developing of itself into a community and even like a family in some sense. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that's what Hacia is for you. And I love that. One thing that I noticed throughout this entire conversation is there's so much history. And I really like the way that you talk about it because it is part of your story. I know with your involvement with the Chicago Commission on Landmarks, in a way it's very similar that there's these places that tell stories. So can you talk about your involvement with the Chicago Commission on Landmarks?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. And I kind of want to tell a little story about that. So I don't know if you know this, but my father was served on the Commission on Chicago Landmarks. And so in 2013 he served, and he passed away in 2015. But here's the interesting thing I wanted to talk about was that when he became a commissioner on Chicago Landmarks, I'm working for the firm, and I'm kind of embarrassed because I wasn't that young, but I was very naive in some of the things that I was thinking about. He gets on this commission, and I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, why do you want to serve on this commission? I'm thinking about a project. He was reviewing one of my professor's projects, Dan Wheeler, in a historic district, in the Wicker Park district. And they're kind of like making him change things and taking away. So for me, I was like, this is like, you're getting in the way of progress. You're getting in the way of modernist design. I wasn't that young. I'm embarrassed how old I was, but I really had no clue what the Commission on Chicago Landmarks was about. I had the wonderful opportunity to succeed my father on the Commission on Chicago Landmarks by Mayor Rahm Emanuel appointing me when my father passed away, which is like one of the most incredible gestures that I ever had. Like I said, there's a lot of things that happened that were very good for me at that time. But the Commission on Chicago Landmarks, it's critically important for our city, especially like with such a rich history like we are with Chicago. You know, we're looking to preserve heritage, the stories, the history, and also the evolution of our districts and our buildings, because you're putting new things in place. Buildings have to evolve. So, for example, we're helping with major planning initiatives like LaSalle Reimagine, where you're trying to reactivate the loop, and Landmarks Commission plays a big role in that. Landmarking some of these very deserved buildings that are not landmarked yet, but in doing that, so they have the history, they have the heritage, they have to meet certain criteria to be landmarked. But there's some incredible architecture downtown, so it works very well. And then it allows for these buildings to become landmarks, which allows for vehicles of allowing them to be repositioned, funding sources, property tax incentives, things like that, so that we can reactivate the loop. And that's just an example. It's been an honor to serve on landmarks. It's something that I look forward to. There's different parts of it. There's the Permit Review Committee, and there's the Commission on Chicago Landmarks, which is the primary thing in the primary commission. And then there's this Permit Review Committee, which is also very interesting because you're reviewing permits. So sometimes an owner might not agree with what the historic preservation staff wants. So we get to kind of look at it and have really active conversations about, sometimes can we be flexible on certain things? Are we setting a precedent? So yeah, it's been great to serve.
It's nice to hear you talk about the Chicago Commission of Landmarks, because I didn't know that much about it, and I'm sure some of the people listening also won't know that much about it. But it's really cool because it's definitely a different role. In my head, when I first thought about what it meant to like be on the Permit Review Committee and even on the Chicago Commission of Landmarks, was very different than the way that you described. And I like your perspective on it because it is storytelling and keeping the history in place. So thanks for sharing that. Do you have any advice for people who are questioning what they want to do in architecture?
Yeah, I think architecture has and still is a difficult. You have to have it's a high endurance profession. It does take time to learn a lot, right? To become a good architect. Like, you don't come out of school being a good architect. You can be really passionate and you can be making an amazing trajectory, but you still have to have time. You have to have experience. I don't think it's for everybody either. I don't think architecture is for everybody. I do think that there can be a good life in architecture. And I think that if you do put in the work and you try to stay positive, you find the work that's most meaningful to you, because that's super important. If you're putting in all these hours on something that's not meaningful for you, and sometimes I think there are times in the office where you're gonna do that, but maybe there's something on the horizon, like I'm gonna work on that next. So not to give up if you just get one project, I started with the CVS. That was not my end goal, is just to experience. So you have to be true to yourself. If you believe that you want to do architecture, figure out what kind of work that you want to do. And I think there's opportunities for you if you're in Chicago. I think there's just incredible work around here, incredible opportunities to make an impact, and you just have to find the right place. And sometimes you do have to be a little patient because it takes time, but I think there's a path if you want it.
Thank you for the advice. I'm glad that you were able to be on this episode. And we'll end it with this last question. Do you have any plans for the future, goals or anything?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. In terms of goals for the future, there's a lot of work to still do. I think, we want to continue to do work in Chicago and make an impact in Chicago. And, we look beyond Chicago, and our team, I'm very excited about our team. We're building some really amazing leaders within our company. And so I just look forward to continuing to just be good at what we do, continue to evolve our work with every opportunity, and maybe do some work outside Chicago, which we're doing a little bit of that already. So, yeah.
Well, I'm excited to see you grow. We'll be following you as well. But yeah, thank you for everything, for having this conversation with me, for sharing stories. One thing I love about this podcast is that we're able to tell people's stories and who they are beyond the architecture, beyond the firm. So I'm very glad that you felt comfortable to say everything that you did. I also did want to say, when talking to you, it felt like I was also being able to interview your dad, and I was glad to hear both of your guys' stories being told in this episode. So I did want to thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity to speak. It's been a pleasure, and again, I love the work that you guys are doing. So, keep it up.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone for listening. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform. You can follow us on Instagram at beyondthesurface_designpod or find us at beyondthesurfacepodcast.org. I want to thank our producer, Kayla Kwok, and the Beyond the Surface team for making this podcast possible. Thank you for listening to the episode of Beyond the Surface featuring Gabriel Ignacio Dziekiewicz. Until next time, goodbye.